Hi, I'm Jennifer McCoy. I'm a professor of political science at Georgia State University, and I'm glad to join this panel today. I am doing research on us versus them, sort of toxic political polarization and its negative consequences for democracy around the world. And from that research, I came to believe that it's extremely important that we equip our students with skills to not only understand what's behind this kind of polarization, but also how to respond themselves as citizens, as individuals. And so I devised some strategies, some methods and activities for my course, which is on political polarization and democratic erosion. And I'd like to share some of those with you today. So I will share a brief PowerPoint and discuss it. So our panel on civic education in response to democratic crisis. As I said, I'm starting out with some of the lessons I've learned from my research. And that is that this kind of us versus them polarization that we have harms democracy in several ways. First, it reduces contact and communication between people with diverse points of view. We tend to isolate ourselves, to socialize in our own bubbles. And this happens socially and politically as well. It inhibits cooperation and compromise in problem solving. We see that with government dysfunction, with paralysis, with Congress not being able to make decisions. It creates among individuals, it creates dislike, distrust, and demonization of the other side, of the out group. And so we build these stereotypes, these biases, and we generalize about the other group, the other political camp. And that leads to actually perceptions that the other camp, the other side, can pose an existential threat to the nation or to our way of life. And if we view that anybody is an existential threat, or any particular political party or leaders, then that will motivate us to endorse or support leaders who will violate democratic norms, because we believe it's more important for our side to gain or retain power than it is to look for perhaps compromise, negotiation for the greater good. So what are some classroom strategies to help students develop coping skills or responses to polarization in their own lives, in their own careers, whatever their major or their discipline? There's three I want to share with you right now that I've used in a course that I've been teaching the last couple of years, which is specifically about this topic, polarization and democratic erosion. But I believe that these strategies can be used in any course that you are teaching. The first is creating ground rules at the beginning of a course, a class, for civil discussions, particularly in this contentious time, this contentious political environment. And especially if you're going to be talking about contentious politics or any kind of issue that is divisive, which now can be almost anything, from environmental science to economics and the role of taxes to almost anything. The second are open mind modules, which is a platform, online platform, where students can learn about the science and the psychology behind polarization, and they can also learn conversation skills on how to communicate across differences. And the third is an activity that you can do in class to engage in deliberative dialogue, which is another form to bring new information, new awareness to people, and to help them consider alternative solutions to various kinds of problems. So for the first, in terms of setting ground rules, what I've tried recently, since we've been on Zoom, is I do a Zoom poll at the beginning of the semester. And I tell them I want to ask them to answer questions about what makes them hesitant to participate in a classroom discussion. And then we look at the results, and then I ask them for their ideas on what should be our classroom ground rules to have respectful civil discussions that will encourage people to participate and air their differences, not to, try to just hide any differences. So I give them questions like this in the poll. Unfortunately, on Zoom, you can't do open-ended questions. If you have another format where you can do open-ended questions, you could just ask them. But I gave them things like this. I feel unprepared and uninformed. That is, I feel dumb compared with other students. A lot of them answer that one. I feel hesitant to participate when I feel disrespected or criticized by other students, or when I feel vulnerable exposing something about my identity or experience, or when I see others who are distracted, who are just not paying attention, kind of rude in that way. And then we go on and discuss what are their ideas for ground rules. And that seems to work pretty well. The second thing that I wanted to show you is this Open Mind platform at this website, .org. And it's a virtual learning experience. And what it does is it's helping them create these competencies that I was talking about, communicating across differences, but also to understand the brain science and the psychology underlying what happens when we're in us versus them kind of differences, or in-group, out-group conflicts, and how just normal human behavior and the psychology of it can impede us from crossing divides. So if we are increasingly in divided groups, then our normal human psychology and the workings of our brain can pose these big obstacles. So the more that students are aware of these obstacles, then it's easier for them to deal with them in a positive and constructive way. So this website, which my students love, and I just give them, it has 8 online lessons, about 30 minutes each one. It has built-in quizzes as they go through. It has practice activities in each one. And they're really kind of fun, modules. And it provides you an instructor dashboard, so you can measure student progress throughout the program. They have an optional additional thing where they give you instructions for how to create peer-to-peer conversations. That is pairing up your students after every 2 lessons so they can practice the skills they've learned. And it is all based on science. It's all evidence-based program. So my students have really enjoyed it, and they come, I've had them since we've been online, they do it, as kind of homework preparation for the class. I ask them what they've learned, and they can really come with, wow, this is really helpful. I learned this and that. And I have spread it out over the course of the semester, but then tried to relate it to some of the things we've been talking about. So I want to just show you a bit of the website. So I'm going to change my share screen to show you a bit. So here you can see, and I hope we can see this. I think I better put it up here so that you can see, hopefully the screen better. The website, so these are the 8 lessons. And if we look at each lesson, it gives you a little description. So like the first one, explore the inner workings of the mind. And it says, we'll start by getting to know the 2 systems in our mind, automatic and controlled thinking. We'll learn a helpful metaphor, the rider and the elephant, to understand how these systems work and what we can do to think more rationally, even in the heat of a disagreement. And so then it's going to go on from there. And I can show you a little bit of the demo. So you can see, they're using a little bit of graphics, cartoons to show the learning kinds of things. So two types of thinking, where you've got the automatic and controlled, that is basically the gut instinct and the rational part of the brain. And it goes on to teach the student about that, and then asking them questions. And then every once in a while, it'll ask them a question here to review. And so it will give them a choice, and then it will tell them if they're right or wrong. So let's see if I answer this one. It'll say, you know, very nicely, not quite, and go on and explain what they missed there. So going back to my presentation. The topics covered in here are these 8. And so you can see the first one is about the science, the brain science. The roots of our differences, they actually use moral foundations research by Jonathan Haidt, coming out of social psychology. Cultivating intellectual humility, that's great for students to learn at any point in their student career. Welcoming diverse perspectives, exploring other worldviews, challenge the culture of contempt, so being careful about how you respond to somebody who really disagrees with you, managing emotions during difficult conversations, and then mastering difficult conversations. So actually really tips on how to carry out a difficult conversation. So I would really recommend this website. I think it's really very good. The other thing they do is they give everybody, all the students fill out a questionnaire to start with, and then a questionnaire at the end. So this is a pre and post course questionnaire for Open Mind to measure the impact, what people are learning from their course. And by the way, they offer this also for corporations, for any kind of organization can use this, can access this website. Now, the third thing I wanted to show you is an activity about deliberative dialogue. So this is a new effort. This is designed by political scientists as a new kind of mechanism to try to overcome our political problems in problem solving, and kind of the separation between elected officials and citizens, and problems with uninformed citizens as well. But how could citizens be better informed, help to form decisions on complex policy problems, and have input with their elected representatives? So it can be done at the citizen level. It can also be done with elected representatives, or just among like state legislators. But this is the idea behind it. What is deliberative dialogue? Scott London from the Kettering Foundation says, it's a form of discussion aimed at finding the best course of action. Deliberative questions take the form, what should we do? The purpose is not so much to solve a problem as to explore the most promising avenues for action. Deliberative dialogue differs from other forms of public discourse, such as debate, negotiation, brainstorming, consensus building, because the objective is not so much to talk together as to think together, not so much to reach a conclusion as to discover where a conclusion might lie. So considering alternatives, receiving information about the alternatives, and discussing together, which can often help to change your own mind. There is a group, Project Pericles, which is trying to help instructors use this activity in a class to try it out, and you can do it in any discipline. So they have deliberative dialogue discussions. They have little modules for you with resources, with little introduction on different topics that you could use in any discipline, and you can come up with your own. So I came up with my own that I want to show you that was relevant to my class. And it was on this topic. It just happened in Georgia. It happened that I had scheduled this session for them to try out deliberative dialogue right after the Georgia legislature had passed the election bill, SB 202, that has gotten so much attention and controversy and discussion. So I just wrote this little intro for them about it. This is the problem and then the questions that they were going to address. So it's ensuring equal access to voting. In today's polarized environment in the United States, even the act of voting is interpreted through partisan lenses. Georgia has been ground zero for the debate about voting integrity and voting access. The new election law passed by the state legislature in March 2021 has been interpreted by Republicans as expanding access and by Democrats as restricting access. It has also engendered responses calling for boycotts, statements of concern from corporations, and condemnations of those statements themselves. And the decision by the Major Baseball League to withdraw the All-Star baseball game from Atlanta in protest. So then the questions for the students to address are, in what ways does the new law expand access, and in what ways does it restrict access? And for whom? Given your own assessment of the impact of the law, what should be the response by civic organizations and citizens who have concerns about it and want to bring about further change? And then what you do is you give them some possible responses, issue stances. It's recommended not to make it just a binary, either this or that, but to consider at least 3 possibilities so that they can be creative and think about alternatives. I gave them 5 based on what I've seen are the actual responses people have taken. So the first stance they might take is citizens and organizations should embrace the new law because it expands access to voting and protects against fraud and isn't as bad as it could have been anyway. There were more extreme ideas that the legislature did not take up. The second one, organizations and industries should boycott Georgia until the legislature changes the law, and citizens should boycott corporations to press them to speak out before such laws passed in the first place in Georgia and other states. So that could be a second stance. A third one would be responding to corporations who criticize the law and say instead, sorry about that, I just lost this somehow. Okay. And instead boycott the corporations who criticize the new law because they should not interfere in politics. A fourth stance might be encourage companies to stay in Georgia and support voter mobilization efforts rather than donate to legislators who support restrictive voting laws. And a fifth might be focus on national efforts to create uniform voting standards since the states can't be trusted to ensure equal access to voting. So these are all positions that have been taken by someone or some organization in Georgia. And what I did was then I asked the students to, I gave them articles and pro and con articles and kind of fact-checking articles so they could learn about the law. I gave them articles about the responses that people had taken. And I asked them to consider, we've been studying resistance to political change around the world and different methods, including boycotts and strikes and stuff. So I asked them to think about those as they were considering their responses. And so they had to come prepared, and then they had about half an hour with their group to, in small groups. I break them out into breakout rooms. So they had about 4 people in each group where they kind of discuss this. What have they learned? What are the pros and cons of the law? Okay, now what should be the response? What should be the civic response to this law? And I gave them a poll beforehand, asking them which of these they favored before they started the discussion. And then I gave them a poll after. And there was some change before and after. So it was very interesting to see. So this was a way for them to actually practice a new method that's been proposed as a way to kind of overcome some of our polarization in the country as a new strategy. So those are 3 ideas that I wanted to share with you, and I hope you will have a great discussion, including with your own ideas that you have tried. Thank you very much.